Good morning or good afternoon, everybody, depending from the area you are looking this video. My name is Stefano Moscatelli. I'm a teacher here at Raffles Milano, and today I will do an introduction about interior design. Interior design, that is a sector that is really wide. If you think interior design, it's the space where people meet, where people have experiences. So the possibilities that there can be are infinite. But interior design is a sector that in the history had many kinds of interpretation. If you think there are designers that interpreted it through the use of an image, through the designing of a space, or through the placement of a series of objects. And also different is the representation that is given to all these kinds of spaces. We have, for example, sketches, we have, for example, photographs, we have models or real constructions. Interior design is a sector that is full of contamination. Since the modern age, but also since the past, there are many contacts between this area, this specific area, the area of interior, and other kinds of arts, as, for example, paintings or sculpture. In this sense, a good example can be in the avant-garde movement at the beginning of the past century, the examples of the buildings, the interior that were designed by the avant-garde movements, the neoplasticist architects, the futurist architects. Today, this contamination is going on. It's going on also with other sectors of art, the new sectors of art. I'm thinking about cinema, for example. How much were influential the interiors in the movies of Stanley Kubrick, of Jacques Tati, and also today in the movies by Wes Anderson, in the way the architects are interpreting this specific theme. Also, music is another sector that is included, and the contamination comes from a sector to the other and goes also at the opposite. Interior design is a word that is really wide because it's in continuous evolution still in our days, and later I will show you how these spaces of today are going to change. This evolution comes certainly from the inventions and the discoveries that were during the history. We have inventions and discoveries related to the economic aspects, or to social aspects, or to environmental aspects. Every changing coming from these areas created a new consequences in the way the interior designers design their spaces. And then another aspect that we have to consider is the scale of the interior design. A scale that stays in the middle between the scale of a product and the scale of the architecture. It's really hard to find a specific limit between these different scales, also because the interpreters of these scales many times are very different, and so there is a kind of continuity between a scale, a dimension, and the other dimension. So today, you understand, for the topic is really wide, and so for preparing this introduction, I try to organize my lesson in two parts. The first part is related to the sectors where interior design and the job of the interior designer is called to work. In the second part, instead, we will see 10 examples, 10 specific moments when interior design, the history of interior design, has a turn. Interior design, that is a sector that is quite young. If we think that until 60 years ago, there wasn't a specific figure devoted to this area. Before, in fact, the rule of the people that should have to design spaces were in the hands of three categories: architects, professional decorators, and homemakers. Then, 60 years ago, a new trend started to be focused on this specific area. Until, since the 90s, we have schools that are that have as aim the idea to form a specific figure for this sector. For driving you in understanding what can be the possibilities that an interior designer can have today, I decided to create a series of macro categories where you understand what are the sectors where we can enter. There is a sector that is a part that divides the sector from the point of view of the container of the interior space. And here we consider transport and buildings. There is a sector that instead, there is a division that is based instead on the concept of time. There are interior spaces that are permanent, there are interior spaces that are temporary. And in the end, there is a division from the point of view of the user. A space, an interior space, can be private or public. Let's go to see some examples related to all these macro categories. Transport or architecture or building. Here I told you we are talking about the container, the way the container is made for hosting a specific interior inside. On the left, we see one train designed by the American streamliner designer Henry Dreyfus, the train with a panoramic car, a space that has specific requirement from the point of view of the way the furniture is fixed, because the train is in movement. Of this category are part also boats, also airplanes, and also trains, as we see here. On the right, instead, we see a building, an interior for a museum, in this situation, designed by the American architect Richard Meyer. Here, an interior interesting for the idea to contain another interior, the Arapacis. So it's a museum that contains an historical building. The second division that we find in interior design is between spaces that are permanent, long-lasting, or spaces that are temporary. On the left and on the right, we see two spaces that are focused on a specific category, that is the one of culture. But on the left, we see a museum, one of the most known museums of the history of design, the museum designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, the Guggenheim in New York. A museum that is long-lasting, that is made for staying there for a long, long time. While instead, on the right, we see a temporary exhibition designed by Paolo Portoghesi for the Biennale of Venice in 1980. So an exhibition that today is not anymore, that was lasting just for that specific time. Private and public. So here we are analyzing the interior design from the point of view of the user. Here about this topic, there is a nice book by Penny Spark, Modern Times, that is based on this continuous comparison between the space that is private and the space that is public. A space that is private is really different from the point of view of organization, of the way the spaces are created, from a space that instead is open to everybody. On the left, we see one house, one of the most beautiful houses designed by the Finnish architect Alvar-Aalto, Villa Mairea, a house that is designed for a specific family, so for users that are specific. While instead, on the right, we see the terminal TWA at the JFK, John Fitzgerald Kennedy Airport in New York, designed by the Finnish-American architect Eero Salmi. And here the space instead is open to everybody, is not customized to someone specific. After talking about these macro categories, so how the interior space can be, what are the differences that we can find, I want to drive you in talking about the functions that today are required to the interior designers. We are talking about sectors, and the functions comes from the culture, from the necessity of a specific age. The ones that we are going to see is the age that we are living now. In the past, certainly the sectors were different because the necessities were different. So what are the sectors, what are the functions that are required to an interior designer today? There is a sector that is the one of culture, certainly, and here museums, universities, schools, libraries, auditoriums are few of the examples that can be contained in this group. On the left, we see the History Faculty building by James Stirling, the English architect James Stirling, a faculty that is really interesting because of a great big wave that cover the central open space of the faculty, a space that is made for studying. On the right, instead, we see a museum, one of the most known museums by Daniel Libeskind, the Jewish Museum, a museum that tells the terrible story of the Jewish population through the use of a series of escamotage that created the same feelings and drive people to feel the same feelings of what the Jewish population proved during their history. After the sector of culture, there is the sector of food. And also here we can open many parentheses, because when we talk about food in interior design, we can talk about the place for eating. So an example is the Boa Nova restaurant in Lessa de Palmeira, close to Porto in Portugal, designed by Alvaro Cizzaviera, a space that is organized in a regular way, that it's interesting for the way the tables are oriented. There are big and wide windows, and the tables are placed next to them to see the ocean. On the right, instead, if the first example was about eating, instead the right one is based on preparing food. We see the first modern kitchen designed by the designer Margarete Schulte-Liotsky, the first modern kitchen where everything is functional, everything is made for improving the way the chef is preparing food. Another sector that is really diffused today and really asked today is the one of health. Here we are talking about spa, wellness centers, but also hospitals. And I choose two examples from the history of design: the Tubercolosi Sanatorium by, again, the Finnish architect Alvaralto, a space that is created for helping people to solve the problem of sickness. So the necessity here was to have fresh air, wide windows, and light. And so here you see the space how it's organized, so with these big windows, and also with the designing of these specific chairs that have an angle that is made for breathing better. On the right, another space connected to health, the thermal baths of Vals by the architect Peter Zuntor, a space that is focused on the creation of an interior that is trying to drive all the senses of body to have a beautiful experience. So here the eyes, the ears, the touch are connected, are recalled by the way this interior space is designed. The category of living is another really wide category that we certainly know really well. On the left we see again the house that I showed you before, the private house by Alvaralto, the Villa Mairea, but in the category of living there are not only houses but also hotels and also flats, and also unities for living, like the one that you see on the right, designed by the Japanese designer Kisho Furukawa. Nakagin Capsule Tower is the minimum space for living created in 1972, a space that was really advanced from the point of view of the technology, and that can contain all the functions for living, also the new ones like the televisions and the radio. Another sector is the one of religion, and here we see two examples by the same architect, one of the most known of modern design, Le Corbusier, Swiss architect. On the right, you see Notre Dame du Haut, a place just for praying, where Le Corbusier deeply studied the way the light enters inside the space for creating this aspect of the idea of the presence of God. On the other side, instead, the convent of La Tourette is a space created for the monks, so a space not only for praying, but also for studying and working. Every religion has its own specific place. Certainly here we see two related to the Catholic one, but you have to imagine that every religion has a specific space. A category that is today deeply studied is the one of shopping, and here we see two examples. One is a mall designed by Herzog de Meuron, the Fünfhöfe, that is interesting for the idea of restoration. So they are restoring an existing building to host a new series of shops. And on the right, instead, a shop that certainly changed the way shopping today is thought, the Prada store in New York by Rem Koolhaas. Transport, another really wide sector that includes terminals, that includes stations, metro stations, airports. Here I choose two of them. One is in Milan, so if you will come here, you are welcome to see it. The metro stations of the Line 1 of Milano, designed by Franco Albini, with a deeply attention for the graphic and the colors of the interiors. And on the right, instead, the terminal, again by Rosario, that today was converted into a hotel. So we could contain this slide also in the one of Lille. And in the end, another sector that is still available today, but is still in evolution if you think to the last happening, is the one of working. So I'm talking about offices. Here I choose two examples, one by Hermann Erzberger in Apeldoorn, and the other one instead here again in Milan by the Italian architect Gio Ponti, the Pirelli skyscraper. So after this first part that I hope is clear, so we saw the macro categories, so what are the sectors involved by the interior design, what are the functions that today are required to an interior design. Now I want to bring you to do a kind of walking in the history to see which were the most important steps in the evolution of interior design. Here, if you check on the books, you will find many different opinions about which are the most important. So these are the most important that I choose for you. Every time we talk about interior design, we have to consider three main elements that are used by the interior designers for creating their spaces. One are the volumes, the shape of the volumes in a space, the way they are placed in a space. Then there is the light that is always really studied, and the artificial and the natural one. And in the end, the surfaces. I'm talking about colors and also materials, because the changing of a material can change the aspect of the interior. So before talking with you about the importance of these interiors, every time you see these pictures, try to think about them from these 3 points of view: light, materials, and volumes. In the 19th century, the interiors were designed and characterized like the one that you see here, Victor Horta, Hotel Tassel, an interior that is clearly Art Nouveau, where the key word is decoration, decoration that is everywhere. Everywhere, because we find it on the wallpaper, we find it also on the banister, on the way the iron is designing the banister, and also in the structure itself of this entrance. Have a look at the pillars that have a shape of a tree. This was the most common interior in that period, but then something happened. The Crystal Palace, the first world exhibition in 1851, certainly created an evident turn in the way the modern design of the interior was made. Here we are not anymore in front to a space that is decorated, but it's a space that is characterized by the presence of elements that are precast by the industry. So every element is the same, it's repeated to form in the end a wide volume completely covered by glass, completely transparent. From this building, modern age started and the way interior spaces were created was certainly different. Created evolution in sector and in every sectors. Here we see an evolution thanks to what we saw before in the way the offices were designed. The Johnson Works Administration Center designed by Frank Lloyd Wright is an example really interesting because of the idea of the continuity of the space that is always a characteristic of Frank Lloyd Wright, but for the first time brought here in an office. With consequences that were really important because the quality of the workers certainly improved. Then another example that I chose was the one by Le Corbusier, the Unité d'Habitation. Here we are in just after the Second World War. There is the problem of the lack of the houses, so Le Corbusier tried to solve this problem with the creation of these prototype buildings that contain many flats and also other functions necessary for living, like nurseries, shops and restaurants. Everything in a building, with the problem of the theme of repetition. So each flat was has the same entrance of the other one. And so Le Corbusier paid strong attention to the theme of the colors for creating differences from a space to the other one. And then he created inside flats that were really flexible, that can be joined or divided to be adapted to the quantity of people that were in a specific family. This trend of flexibility goes on until we arrive at this famous exhibition in New York that is called Italian, the New Domestic Landscape, and here we see the prototype designed by Joe Colombo. An interior that now it's really flexible, that can stay everywhere. Here we are in front to another unity for living. In a minimum space, we can sleep, we can cook, we can watch television, but in few meters. Everything then connected to the wide use of colors that now is a characteristic really important, and to the idea that the new modernity must be completely different from what was before, that was really formal. Now instead it's much more friendly. Then I couldn't leave out from my personal list the interior of Carlo Scarpa, whose name is strictly connected to the city of Venice. And here we see one of the buildings that he designed, the Querini Stampaglia Foundation, that today is a museum. So if you will come in Italy, it's another building that certainly need to be visited. And it's a space that was restored by Carlo Scarpa. The space had a very important problem, the flooding. And so Carlo Scarpa chose to create a new pavement that was lifted up, as you see here, from the original level, restoring every interior with a new kind of architecture that in the end is perfectly joined and in harmony with what was the architecture of the past. So we are talking about relationship with what was before, and Carlo Scarpa certainly is a master in this field. Today, interior spaces have many possibilities, shows many different interpretations. And here we see the one that is made by an high-tech architect, Foster. Here it's a new trend. Now buildings are not only containers, but are full of elements for living better, plumbings, air conditioning, whatever was functional for the building, now it's shown, is not hide anymore. Also, the connection between the floor and the staircase becomes an element that marks the space. The structure as well, and have a look also at the banister where all the connections are shown. And it's the opposite of a kind of view like the one by Tadawando, with its minimal space, the Cuscino house, where the surfaces instead are almost completely clean, just marked by the mold for fixing the concrete that we see is marking the texture of the space. Another interpretation that is today really diffuses the one of the Constructivist movement, and the most known space was the one of the Guggenheim Museum by Franco Gehry. Here the keyword is disharmony, so there is no more regularity, no more repetition, but everything instead is going in an apparent disorder, with the use also of materials that are new, like the steel, the iron, and specific kinds of metal like the titanium that covers the building outside. And in the end, the last our walking in the history stops with this last building, again, a building that we have already seen from the point of view of a function, the thermal baths of Vals by Peter Zumthor. It's a building that I told you is interesting for the way, for the experience that you have entering inside, but it's a building that is interesting also for the way it's built. The material that covers the interior of the space and also the exterior is a stone that is taken 1 kilometer from the site. So the energy for moving this material is really low. We are going to enter in the age of sustainability. That is a key word today. And if you think about how interiors are designed today, the attention to this theme of the energy is really high. But I told you that interior design is in continuous evolution. So preparing this introduction, I asked myself how the interior spaces will change after what we have just lived. And a good answer comes from an article that I found on Corriere della Sera that was describing how the flats under construction in Milan are going to be changed. If before the constructors thought about flats that were small, now the situation is changed because people want to have terraces because they spend more time at home and wants to have a space for smart working. So the solution was to join 2 flats into one for finding these spaces during the construction. So how much interior design will change with this evolution? Probably a lot. And I close my introduction saying that our rule as designer is to be the best interpreters of the future. And to be the best interpreter of the future, we have a few instruments that are in our hands, and one of them is certainly the history. Here I choose a sentence by one of the most important product designers of the history, Vico Magistretti, that says that we are part of a chain with a hand in the future and a hand in the past. So we are connecting two sectors, two things. One that is what happened, and we have to learn from what happened. And on the other side, instead, we have to image the future. And to image the future, we need to have a knowledge of the past. This is a good instrument, certainly, for imagining what will happen and how, in the future, mankind will react to the new inventions and discoveries. So I invite you to meet again at the next workshops, and with me on the 30th of June, we will have a workshop about interior design, but there are many others before. There is the one by Lorenzo Jacqueline, by Laura Budenzig, and by Emanuele Locco. So we are waiting for you there, and so if you have questions, I am here ready to answer. I don't know if we have any question by someone.
Yes, we have a few questions for you, Stefano.
Yes.
The first one. It's easy to find a job as an interior design?
It depends always on the way you face this argument. I mean, it's in every sector. It could be easy or hard to find a job. It depends from the way you approach people, from the way you develop your researches, and from the way you create your things. So everything can be hard, or everything can be really simple. It depends only from the way you approach these things.
what are the characteristics that a good designer must have?
First of all, there are two things that we have to consider. One is the technical approach. So you have to do experiences, as many experiences that you can have, because it's a job that I told you is in continuous evolution. So every time you do a project, you will learn something, and so to do experiences is certainly a good point for becoming designer. And the second thing that you have to consider if you want to be a good designer is to have a lot of passion. So you have to do always a bit more than is necessary for getting a good result.
Then another one. What is the most beautiful, interesting project you design in your life?
I will answer quoting a famous designer that said, the next one, the next that will come.
Okay, then we have Tuba from North Macedonia.
Yeah. Hi.
She's an architect.
Yes.
And now she's working on a project in Germany.
See.
And she said, I have the chance to work with different variety of people with different tastes. We change for different reasons. Sometimes I have clients that have a taste really opposite to mine as a designer. My question is more important to have a happy client and not so happy designer, or the opposite? And also, is there some middle line that can connect both? Thank you in advance, looking forward to join your master program.
Well, great. This is a good question because it's something that always happens if you are in Italy, if you are in South America, everywhere it happens. Also, always the same. The key is that if you are a really good designer, you are able to convince your client. So then certainly there is a point in the middle, but certainly if you have the right way, the right approach that I was saying before, you show your passion, many times you have in front clients that will understand your meaning. Certainly there must be a part of the client. If not, you will design always interior for yourself, but instead you are designing interior that must be always different, and the rule of the client is necessary for having these differences. So thank you, and I hope to see you soon.
Another question.
Yeah.
What do you look for an interior design student?
What I look, first of all, I said you, the passion that he pays in the things that he does, the idea that you always have to improve yourself. If you, some people say that you become a real designer when you are 40 years old, so because you need experience. So this means that until that time, at least until that time, you have to learn, you have to learn, you have to learn. You must be like a sponge from every experience that you live, and you have to bring them in your life and in the way you work.
Yeah, then we have two questions that are quite similar, so I tell you both, and then you can choose how to answer. I'm confused between taking up interior design and architecture. Can you advise me on this? And the other question is, what is the main difference between interior architecture and interior design?
Mm-hmm. Well, interior design and interior architecture, we are talking, I'd say more or less the same. So we are talking about what you are dealing with, what is inside a volume. That can be, as I show you from the macro categories, in movement, private, public. So this can be the possibilities. The other question was about the first one.
If I'm confused of choosing the architecture, faculty, or interior design.
Well, I told you the sectors are really close, so don't worry about this because you can take away, and because of the fact that they are not so far, you can choose during your experience because they are really close sectors. So if you will face interior spaces, you will certainly deal with architecture, buildings, but also products, because I told you before, there is a strict connection between these different dimensions.
That was the last question.
Okay, so thank you for the attention. I hope the introduction will be useful for you. We wait for you on the social networks, Instagram Raffles Milan, and Raffles Milan Istituto Moda e Design for Facebook and YouTube. Thank you. See you here in Milan.